This video is a brief review on the inverted pyramid for the purposes of students in writing for media. If you're interested in learning more, Chapter 5 in your book goes over writing the inverted pyramid style in more detail. And of course, you are always welcome to take Journalism 1 and 2. This is also for students who have taken those courses, but maybe it's been a little while and you need a quick refresher on the format and how it works. So this image here, I'd like to thank Jan Shaw for her wonderful PDF that's available, kind of showing a visual depiction of the inverted pyramid for us. It is a structure that goes in descending order from the most important information at the top, and then the next most important, and you keep going until you have finished, and then you simply stop writing. So the most important information goes to the top, and it is called a lead. This is spelled one of two ways. The way that we normally spell it, L-E-A-D, would be confused with lead, which was used in the printing process. And so in order to make it clear when you're printing newspapers what you were talking about, they developed another way of spelling lead, L-E-D-E. Now, this lead is going to have your most important information. You should write a lead so that if the reader only read that one sentence, they would get the gist of your story. You want to at least include who, what, where, and when. Now, you might have heard that, every good story has who, what, where, when, why, and how. The why and how comes later in your story, but you want to at least have an understanding of who and what is involved in your story right at the very beginning. There are different kinds of leads. You can look in depth in your book to find out the definitions of all of these kinds of leads. But for the purposes of our writing, focus on summary leads and maybe direct quote leads. Very, very rarely we can use a question lead. But in this case, we're going to be focusing on summarizing the information at the beginning of our story. The basic story structure is descending order of importance. You start off with most important thing and then basically assume your reader stops after each sentence or each paragraph, and that's all that they read. How much more information would they have? Is this the next most important piece of information to give them? A good tip is to write a lead that is 30 words or less and use the past tense. Ask yourself, what about the story is the most interesting? Make sure that that is in your summary lead. You want to make sure that your reader is hooked and interested from the very beginning. There's no introduction in this non-academic style of writing. You want to immediately get to the point and tell the reader what is important. If your reader has no more information than your lead, they should still know what happened from your summary of the story's most important elements. Now, you'll develop the story. We're in your second paragraph, which should be almost as important as your lead, the next most pressing question, your succeeding paragraphs, and then you're going to just end. So remember, your second paragraph should have the second most important piece or pieces of information. Think about what questions the reader is going to have immediately after reading your lead. Try to answer those questions. Now, in the paragraphs that are going to come after that, you're going to provide additional information. And remember to always go in order of importance, not necessarily chronology. Or don't go by time, go by what is most important. When you end, you want to make sure that all logical questions have been answered. If you understand the why and the how, answer those. You may not have that information at the time. Make sure that all interesting information has been presented, but you will not conclude or summarize in this kind of a story. You will simply end your writing. So there's a template. It's provided by Jan Shaw, and it is available to you in Blackboard. And I'm just going to pop these guys in. They give you one way of approaching writing a basic inverted pyramid story. Now, these kinds of stories often include quotes from other people. We're going to do a writing assignment where we are working with the structure and you may not have quotes from other people. I want us to focus on how we're telling the information. We're going to work on quotes a little bit later. But as a general rule, remember that it is important to know who you're getting your information from. And whether it is a direct or indirect quote, you should be able to identify who it is that you got your information from. So I want to just quickly touch on quotations. You are allowed to use quotations in your story if it is applicable. Now, direct quotations are exact words. Those are things that are contained within quotation marks. If you do not have the exact words, then you cannot put quotation marks around that quote. It is not a direct quote. You always have to attribute or give credit to who is speaking in a direct quote. Now, these can bring the story to life. You get to know exactly what people are thinking, what it is that they said, and it can really bring a lot of drama to a story. But you need to make sure that you're clear about telling exactly what the person says. So if you were going out to write a news story, I would have you record them. Now, remember that they cannot be paraphrased if they are in quotation marks. That's the other type of quote. But it can be something that's really memorable, or it's something colorful that adds a bit of a difference in tone because it's coming from someone speaking. The kind that don't go in quotation marks, those are indirect quotes, and in that case, you're often paraphrasing. You can use fewer words. Make sure that you maintain the meaning of what the person said. Don't manipulate it in order to get across something that you're interested in. Do not use quotation marks if you are changing anything that the person is saying. Use an indirect quote. You will still attribute who it is who said it, but you make sure that you do not put words in their mouth. So, remember to introduce the comments of experts, witnesses, or bystanders in order to have people understand why their quote is relevant. What makes these people a credible source? Why do they care about what the person has to say? So again, here's an example of how you can maybe approach your third paragraph. And again, in this case, we're saying, maybe you want to have your lead and then a quote from someone, and then you have another paragraph expanding on your lead. And maybe in this case, it's not a direct quote, but it's some background information that you're providing. It's important to keep in mind ways in which we can keep these kinds of stories going. It can feel a little disconnected if you're just spitting facts out of people. So you can use things like conjunction, and, or, but, etc. in order to help your writing flow. You can also have these little hooks that you can sprinkle throughout the writing. There may be words or phrases that are repeated, and what that does is bring continuity to the writing. Now, I'm going to mention using pronouns. Make sure that you're very clear when you do use pronouns. You want to avoid repeating names of peoples and things all over the place. It does become quite repetitive. It's kind of a hook is to make things interesting. If you get too repetitive, people get annoyed. But make sure that it's always clear who the subject of a pronoun is. Don't use she or he if we don't know who that is supposed to be. So make sure that it's always following directly from when you have referenced the person that is in question. Now, associations are kind of like hooks, but you're using different words. So they're ideas that you repeat within the article, but you use a different word in order to maybe be a little less repetitive. Now, as I mentioned, you're not going to present the story in order that it happened, but in order of importance. So at times it's then necessary to make the chronology or order of events clear for the reader. So you can use chronology words in order to make it clear to the reader what happened when by giving a time. And enumeration is a way to bring in numbers when you're writing. So again, depending on the content of your piece, it might be important to give scale to have people understand the scope of what you're talking about. I did want to touch, since we mentioned pronouns, on one pronoun in particular. Do not use the first person I, and try to avoid using the second person you. Use neutral language. Use he, she, it, they. You should not, even if you're writing a story about yourself, write about yourself in the third person. You need to make sure that you can write in a neutral manner, and as much as at times you'll read something that does have an I or a you in it, you need to have command over how to write in the third person first. The other tip that I would give you about writing in this style is to write in really short paragraphs. Normally, again, this is another thing that maybe goes against what you're taught in English class. This is not academic writing like you get in your English class. This is for a specific purpose. That's something that's going to come up a lot in this class, is the purpose and the context of your writing. In this context, you want to be writing really short, sharp paragraphs. One idea in one paragraph. If you've got a second idea, it's a whole other paragraph. Some paragraphs may only be one sentence, and that's absolutely fine. Quotations should always be in their own paragraph. So again, thinking about ways in which you can kind of template this, have description, and again, a lot of these things may be one sentences. And you're going to keep going till we kind of get to the end. Now, one thing to keep in mind is not to let yourself get sidetracked by something else that interests you if it's not the point of the article. Always go back to that lead. What is it you're trying to convey? It may be that there is a different story, a second story that's happening that you also want to tell, or perhaps there's a sidebar, a little few paragraph piece that goes alongside the story. But your story should always kind of stick to the point in this kind of writing. So you're going to continue to weave together your facts, any quotes, interviews, observations, but make sure you follow the basic format of the most important piece of information, followed by answering the kind of question that comes to the reader's mind next, what's the next most important piece of information, and so on and so forth. You can add more facts and more quotes as the piece calls for it. But when you run out of information, you just stop writing in this format. Now, that bothers a lot of people. We've been told in our English classes to have a conclusion. You do not have a conclusion in an inverted pyramid story. That goes at the top. So if that really bugs you, you can end with a quote. But if and only if it fits smoothly into the story. We'll talk in the main section about kickers and how those can be used in some kinds of writing. And we'll consider whether or not a kicker is useful for your piece when we come together to edit. But for the purposes of our stories, you're going to end when you run out of information and you just stop. I mean it. In the inverted pyramid, the writer is going to structure quotes, anecdotes, observations, facts, and statistics in diminishing order, so most important at the top to least important at the bottom, until the end, where the writer throws in the remaining information that isn't all that important or that wouldn't fit elsewhere. And then you stop writing. I cannot stress this enough. In the inverted pyramid style, there is no need for a closer. And if you feel that you absolutely have to have a close, you use a direct quote from someone, and again, you need to say why they're important.